All right, tonight, President Trump is on a complete tear by continuing to keep his promises and enact the agenda that you, the American people, voted for in November of 2016. The DHS Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, she made a major announcement earlier today about President Trump's plan to secure the southern border. Here's what she said.
The president has directed the National Guard personnel be deployed to the southern border. The Department of Defense, as you know, has long supported the efforts of DHS to protect our nation's borders. This includes ongoing counter-narcotic missions, infrastructure construction, persistent surveillance operations training, and aerial support throughout the Western Hemisphere. The Department of Defense is a longtime partner of the Department of Homeland Security, and I thank them for their support. While plans are being finalized, it's our expectation that the National Guard will deploy personnel in support of CBP's border security mission.
And tonight we have learned that President Trump has signed the proclamation to send the National Guard to the southern border. Now, the president, he deserves a lot of credit because if Congress, if they're not going to lift a finger to solve the problem, then he is going to take the steps as commander-in-chief and do it on his own, which he now has. Now, before the liberal media, all you leftists out there, start losing your collective minds over the National Guard being deployed at the southern border, with all due respect, we will educate you. There is already precedence for all of this. Both George W. Bush and Barack Obama, they actually did the exact same thing. And President Trump's tough rhetoric calling for Mexico to disband this caravan, as you see, of asylum seekers heading for the U.S. border, that's also working. Now, according to reports, more than 1,000-person caravan has now fallen apart. Leaders of the group are now saying they will no longer head for America's southern border. Now, this is the start of good news for the president. Look at this, a brand new Rasmussen poll. His approval rating is now 51%, which is higher than Barack Obama's. During the exact same time in his presidency, he was only at 46%, and he got reelected. But the liberal media probably won't be telling you that tonight. They're too busy orchestrating an onslaught of any negative story that they possibly can find, obsessing over, oh, Stormy Daniels and Trump-Russia collusion, Russia, that doesn't exist. Now, there's also a fake news CNN poll. This is pretty amazing. It shows President Trump making major gains with 4 key groups. He's gained 8 points with men since February, 5 points with younger voters, 9 points with middle-aged voters, and he's up by 10 points with college graduates. Now, here's what's so interesting about these polls. Just imagine if the president wasn't constantly under attack from a media that wants to destroy him. Imagine if Robert Mueller and his team of Democratic donors weren't carrying out their never-ending witch hunt. Don't you think the president's poll numbers would be a lot higher if a majority of the country wasn't being fed an endless stream of outright lies, propaganda, distortion, and misinformation? Now, despite all of that, President Trump, he's just rolling along doing his job every day, the job that you elected him to do. Look at this, manufacturing. This is good news. By the way, for the media to be so successful in their attacks against Trump, they're kind of cheering against the country succeeding. Look at this, the strongest in 3 years. ADP, Moody's Analytics, they are now saying that 241,000 jobs created in March, and that's on top of the record low unemployment levels that we now have. Over 3 million jobs created since Donald Trump's elected. And by the way, the lowest unemployment numbers ever for African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Look at this, home equity at a record level, $5.4 trillion. The president is also taking a big step. This is amazing. Nobody ever reports it, to make health care more affordable for everybody and getting around some of the devastating Obamacare mandates. Here's an op-ed in USA Today explains how the Trump administration is now set to lay out a new rule. They're about to implement this. It will lower the costs, create choices by expanding association health plans. Now, these plans allow businesses and trade associations to come together, buy health insurance plans in bulk. That saves a ton of money. And by the way, a huge development. You get more care for less money. And the president also is taking steps to reduce the bloat. Remember that $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill that nobody liked? Well, thank God he reluctantly signed it. Now this is the bill that the president threatened to veto. But remember, he was forced to kind of sign it because Congress, well, they left town. They're too lazy. Well, now the White House is looking into using what is known as the Impoundment Control Act. It's a law from 1974. It gives the president the authority to cancel spending already approved by Congress. And by the way, they only need 51 votes in the Senate, Mitch. Congress would have 45 days to approve the president's request to cut from the massive spending bill. Again, he's keeping a promise. Let's hope that happens. Then on top of all of this, just take a look at the side of your screen. You'll never see this in the media. A list of just some of the president's many accomplishments during his short time in office. Now, remember, the Heritage Foundation, they did a study of the president's first year. They found he has already accomplished 64% of his agenda, which, by the way, is higher than Ronald Reagan's 49% at the same time in his presidency. These are real, tangible achievements that help the forgotten men and women that voted in November of 2016 that the liberal media will never talk about because they never want to give the president credit for anything. And as we've been explaining, President Trump is just on fire, and it's time for congressional Republicans to follow suit. Time to get a backbone. Time to keep their promises. No more waiting around. Let's see what happens in 2018. It's time for members of the GOP. Keep their word, keep their promises. And that means they should build this southern wall. They should keep the 7-year promise to repeal and replace Obamacare. You know, things that they all said and promised when they were campaigning. Now, here's what's going to happen if Republicans don't keep their promises. Democrats are going to try to systematically undo every single one of those accomplishments. We'll put them back on the screen. Nancy Pelosi has already threatened that she's going to try and repeal the tax cuts that benefit 90% of Americans. By the way, you keep going, Nancy. Good job. Don't stop. I want you to stay on message. So it's up to congressional Republicans to show some backbone, some spine, and actually fight for the president's agenda that you voted for. Now, former House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz. Now, he's going to join us in a few minutes. He's out with a list of 10 things that Congress should be doing right now. In the article, Chaffetz suggests Congress should explain and clarify the conflicts of interest on Special Counsel Mueller's team. I don't think there is an explanation. They should formally demand the appointment of a second special prosecutor with the power to prosecute. He lists call FISA court judges before Congress to offer public testimony. They were all lied to. Call Attorney General Jeff Sessions to testify about outstanding congressional subpoenas, hold hearings on securing our borders, fortifying them with a wall, and then pass legislation allowing the president to reallocate funds from the DOD. And, of course, Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, she should be called to testify. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter's Jack Dorsey, they should be called to testify about their speech suppression practices, especially against conservatives. So Zuckerberg will testify before lawmakers next week about Cambridge Analytics. Now, Congress, by the way, should make an effort to reform the broken budget process. They should give states the opportunity to vote on whether Congress should be subject to balancing the federal budget. And finally, the Senate should refuse to recess until every single one of the president's appointees have been voted on. Mitch, time to work. Anyway, Congressman Chaffetz will be here in a minute. But first, we have more breaking news tonight. House Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, he has sent a letter to the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and the FBI Director Christopher Wray. Now, Nunes is blasting the repeated stonewalling by the Department of Justice, which is being led by Rosenstein, in refusing continually to hand over documents that have been subpoenaed by Congress. Remember, Rosenstein is the guy that ran into Paul Ryan's office back in January at the last hour, begging Speaker Ryan to block Congressman Nunes's request for documents about all the FISA abuses and the dossier. We wouldn't have learned that had Paul Ryan capitulated. Without those documents, there never would have been a Nunes memo, and we would not know about any of the massive scandals that we are talking about every night unfolding, like the FISA abuse, lying to judges to get a warrant to spy on a Trump campaign associate, in that case, Carter Page. Rod Rosenstein, why does he want to keep all of this a secret? Why does he want to protect all his corrupt friends? But now, after months of obstructing, Chairman Nunes is demanding answers. And by the way, Nunes has been asking for documents. Some go back to August of 2017. Rod, hand the documents over to the American people. That's how ridiculous this entire process is. And Nunes is now requesting the DOJ do their job. And, of course, Congress has their job. We have checks and balances. We have co-equal branches of government. The DOJ turn over the unredacted version of an FBI memo related to the Bureau's opening of the Russia investigation. Nunes has set a deadline, April 11th. Now, given what we've seen from Rosenstein, it's probably going to be a long time before the House Intel Committee gets to see this. The level of obstruction and protection, the incestuous nature of the relationships, this is beyond disgraceful. Rosenstein has done everything possible that he can do to prevent Congress from doing their job, which is oversight. They have a constitutional, not only right, but duty to do so. So tonight, it's time for Rod Rosenstein to stop hiding the truth from the American people. Now, his boss is the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. And Jeff Sessions rightly said last week that he's angry at the slow pace that these documents are being turned over. Well, you know what? Well, the Attorney General needs to do something about it. If the Attorney General is angry, he needs to take action and force the Deputy AG, Rosenstein, to do his job. And if Rosenstein doesn't want to, then he needs to go, because that is how our government is supposed to work. Now, Congress needs to be able to get answers on behalf of you. We now see corruption at the highest levels of government. And then you got a corrupt media. Well, they're in major denial. They're beside themselves over reports that President Trump is not currently, let me repeat, not a target of the special counsel Robert Mueller's corrupt investigation. Now, despite this new development, the media is desperate. They're holding out hope. They're on their knees. They're praying to God that somehow, some way, Robert Mueller will still find a way to make Donald Trump the target and go after the president. Now, think through this. If that ever happened, is that good for the country? Is that good for the forgotten men and women of the country? Does that create jobs? Does that get people out of poverty and off of food stamps? No. Does it keep us safer? No. Do they seem to care? No. Take a look.
A subject just means someone of interest to the grand jury, but it can also mean someone who's on the road to being charged with a crime.
It's a big deal to be under criminal investigation by the FBI, particularly if you're president of the United States.
So certainly being a subject, they shouldn't be cracking open any champagne in the White House if he's the subject of an investigation.
A target is somebody they're going to indict, and the president, by the policy, cannot be indicted. So it's a little vague what they're meaning, and it may be to make Mr. Trump relax.
If someone walked in my office and said I was a subject of a multi-year criminal investigation led by former FBI Director Robert Mueller, I'd wet my pants.
A non-target letter isn't worth the paper that it's printed on, because the prosecutor can just decide 2 days after he writes the letter that he wants to. Now he made up his mind to charge you.
But you can't help but think maybe it's strategic. Like, tell him he's a subject. He likes being the subject.
Well, we're gonna discuss with some people who have experience in this just how often that occurs.
Yeah.
That there's a little bit of shading of it when they're just on the verge of switching you into target. They still say you're a subject.
They've been saying this for 18 months. The media is not even trying to hide their bias. They want the president impeached. They're not going to stop till it happens. But here's the thing. The media has been flat out wrong about everything regarding the Russia investigation. Now, constitutional law expert Jonathan Turley, Democrat, is scolding the abusively biased media in a new op-ed he's put out. Here's the headline. When will the media accept that Trump is not a criminal target? Now, Turley blasts the media for promising for over a year. Bombshell, 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 smoking gun. It's all coming. Now, here's what he told Martha McCallum earlier tonight. Take a look.
We went through a long period where people talked about collusion as if there was some federal crime called collusion, and then that morphed into obstruction, and then it morphed into things like, campaign finance violations or other issues. All these crimes have elements. They have case precedent. You have to satisfy those. And where you and I have talked that there are areas that should be of a great concern for President Trump, these crimes have not strengthened over time. When before Comey was fired, he told Trump that he was not a target of that investigation.
That's right.
It appears that nothing has changed after over a year.
You would think that after a year of conducting a witch hunt, that Mueller might have something on President Trump, but so far that does not appear to be the case. Not to mention, by the way, this is something the media refuses to accept, as constitutional law professor Alan Dershowitz is explaining. Oh, this is rough for the media to handle. Collusion is not a crime.